Bonjour à tous et à toutes.
Well, hello everyone. Thank you for coming to this late session. We have a great session, a unique session coming up, even though it has been shortened somewhat by the previous session. The title is Where Are Women? As you see, there are 4 on stage, and that's already quite a lot. And this is something new at X, a plenary with only women. And what women? We have the chairperson of ECB, we have the Secretary General of the International Francophonie Organization, and the Secretary of State for European subjects. So 3 remarkable women, and I'll try to show how remarkable they are by saying very quickly where we come from and where we stand. In 1945, that's more or less where our modern world started, no country had the same rights for men and women. In 2022, the World Bank was monitoring the equality between the rights of men and women on the planet. 12 countries had perfect equality. These 12 countries were all within the EU, including France, in fact. So this is something I would like you to remember, because it's not something that came by chance. Europe is a special place for that, but it means that in 178 countries, women and men do not have the same rights. Would you, this equality of rights, which is supposed to be here, to take place here, does it come up with an equality of chances and careers? Because obviously no, because there's a form of cultural discrimination which is very difficult to shake off. So I'll give you a few words before I give the floor. For the past 40 years, women have had more diplomas than men. They have been more successful at school, whatever criteria you use. And also they succeed better in university. In OECD countries, over 60% of people with a diploma from higher education are women. In France, in the 80s, there was more or less the same number of men and women at university. Since then, women have had more diplomas. In fact, in 2008, the unemployment of women was lesser than that of men because they had more diplomas. But if we look at the number of leaders of European companies that are women, there's only 28%. So there's a mismatch between the greater number of women in higher education and the result in their careers. And 16% of companies have no women in their management teams today. So if we look at these results, researching economists have shown these issues because we have the right documents to make a difference between the cause and the correlations. We do controlled exercises and controlled research to have a look at things. So the situation is not all rosy. We've progressed, we've registered progress since 1945. There's still a huge ground to be covered. So I will start with these exceptional panelists who are not only role models and examples, but because of their professional activity, they have a viewpoint on this issue. Mrs. Lagarde, I saw you were going to ask me a question. No. Well, as you're not asking me a question, I'd like to say 3 things to start with. First of all, to thank the Cercle des Economies, Jean-Hervé Lorenzi and his whole group, because organizing a panel of called Gender Equality, Where Do We Stand? Où sont les femmes? Which is the title of a song in French, which some of you might remember, and it also represents a risk. because some people who are listening are probably bored by the topic because they feel that it's none of their business. So the challenge we have here is to make sure that everybody understands that it's a challenge for everyone and not only for women. That's my first introductory remark. Second introductory remark, even though I'm a woman, I can tell you that I spend most of my time fighting against inflation. And a third introductory remark, to convince the world and the markets that I only take care of inflation. I very rarely talk about the issue of women except on March 8th. But today, thanks to the courage of Jean-Hervé Lorenzi and all the people from the Cercle des Economies who agreed to approach this issue, I'm very happy to be in this panel with only women. Madam Secretary of State. Well, okay, I just gave you my introductory remarks and I'll come back to you later on. Thank you. I would like to thank the Cercle des Economies as well for this great conversation between women in front of many women and many men who support women. The global landscape is highly contrasted as to this issue of the gender equality and where we stand. I come from Africa. I come from Rwanda. I know our continent. I know the world a little bit. I lived for 22 years in the U.S. in North America. I've spent time in North Africa, and I've seen a lot of progress. Nevertheless, as to access of girls to knowledge and money, there's still a lot to do. Personally, I believe that the education of girls in the world is key, is the key that will get rid of a lot of locks and a lot of barriers and that will open a lot of doors. And it's all the more important since the ILO says that 70% of poor people in the world are women. This is not acceptable. In the world, I don't know Europe as well as the rest of the world, but very often we're told about the barriers, the preconceived ideas, and we say that it's due to culture. It's a cultural issue. I don't think it's true. I don't think any culture can give a green light for women to be not to be as well treated as boys, girls not to be as well treated as boys, for women not to be able to enjoy their rights. And it's very important to review the practices and that prevail throughout the world. And as Christine said earlier, it's also a work to be done by men. So let's not use culture when it's just an issue of something that is unfair. The third thing I would like to say is that we must have the political will. I'm a political figure. I worked in the private sector and I worked for a government. The political will is really the most important factor if you want to have the situation of women progress, if you want them to occupy their rightful position, if you want to have the right laws that give rights to women, if you want them to be complied with, and it's important to replace prejudice by action. And if I look at the situation of French-speaking women in Sahel or in Southeast Asia, in Lebanon, in Haiti, women have the same desires, the same aspirations as all other women throughout the world. So what we must do is we must act. simply act. There's no secret, there's no miracle solution. We need to have the political will so that women, starting with little girls, can live in a world where they feel good and where they can and they do not have this shyness or this lack of positive aggressivity to be able to negotiate what they rightfully should have. Laurence? Mrs. Secretary of State, well, thank you. First of all, I would like to thank Jean Hervé and the whole Cercle des Économistes for this session. Jean Hervé finally gave in to pressure to organize a great session. Thank you. And I'm going to show him that he was right to do so. I'm going to ask all the population that has 5 years of higher education here to put their hands up. Now only women. You see, there's a great number of them.
Que tous ceux qui sont chefs d'entreprise lèvent la main.
Now those who are corporate leaders, hands up. Now only women. Jean Hervé, you were right. It's very important because what I'm trying to show you is that the four of us and the women who put their hands up in this room are really the tree that is hiding the forest, as they say. The first thing, Louise, you're a political figure. If we look at what happens in Europe, there are here 4 women heading huge institutions: Christine, Ursula, Odile Renaud-Bassot in BERT, and Roberta Metsola in the European Parliament. But if you dig a bit further, in the European Parliament, only a third of women. In the Senate, only a third of women. In the Assembly, only a third of women. And if you look even deeper, if you look at the commissions of the European Parliament, the commissions are really the places where the laws are being drafted. These are the places where the influence is important. There's almost no women at the head of commissions, no women in the commissions. So, and if you look at the European governments of the 27 countries of the EU, we can see that 2/3 of men have regalian functions and are ministers of state. And if you look at the number of women who are ministers of economy and finance, and I would like to pay tribute to Christine once again, there's only 4 out of 27. So as I said, our tree is hiding the forest, and there are a lot of women who are trying to promote the rights of women, but there's still a lot to do. The second thing that is misleading is that the professions where you have more women are the professions where you make less money. And when you get more women in a profession, the salaries are reduced. And since 2010, in terms of access to education and access to health, and I'm talking about Europe, the number of women has increased. And women with a temporary work contract have 78% more risk of being harassed at work. So, yes, we have made a lot of progress, but as long as we talk about women as the weak sex, they will not be considered as being likely to be in power, because the idea of being in power is to be a strong man, and thanks to Jean Hervé, we're going to change that. Thank you very much for these first words. Really great. We're very happy to be here, all of us. So we have a more complete vision now about the situation. We know that there have been some progress made, some gains, but we still have a lot of work to do. So the next question is obviously, now what? What solutions can we contemplate? Personally, as there is a discrimination in some professions, this has changed my vision as to quotas. Because, okay, quota leads people to say, okay, they're here because we have to fill up the quota and they're women. But if you look at the category of people where the quotas have led women to places where they can be useful, this has shown that it can be, after all, a solution. So let me now turn to Christine and ask her, in your opinion, and in view of your experience in the IMF and in the ECB and as a minister, what solutions, what political solutions would you contemplate to promote gender equality? Well, I believe we should first of all measure and assess the gains for a society and for the economy of our countries, the gains that it would bring if men and women had the same way of accessing jobs and the same freedom of choice as well, because you're not good or bad if you're a corporate leader or not. The important thing is to be able to choose. So if all this is protected and if women had the same access to jobs as men, we can calculate in the EU that we would have about 10 million more wage earners and a 10% increase in the GDP by 2050, because this would enrich our economies. We would gain new talents, new competencies, new skills. So knowing that this is the way we have to follow, knowing also that women are often, and I think that the example of Rwanda, and Louise will be able to tell us more about this, knowing that women are really stakeholders for peace and a more sustainable peace, we really have objectives and goals to follow. You're a great economist. You know the role of incentives, the role of sanctions. I believe that France has been able to decide on a number of decisions that have meant gained. If we now have 40% women in the National Assembly of the country, it's due to the fact that the texts that were applied and implemented have enabled women to access the functions of deputy. If we have now 45% of women as managers in the ESBF 20, it's thanks to the Zimmermann law that set up the proper conditions to reach these results. So first thing, set the rules, set up incentives and sanctions, and also set up the right infrastructures. There are moments in the life of parents, I'm not saying of women, but of parents. There are moments when it's difficult to do everything at once. You've gone through that, I've gone through that. And during these periods, you have to have two things. First of all, you must have the infrastructures that will enable to support and help the parents in their mission towards their children. And secondly, you mustn't have mechanisms that will sanction those who decide to take time and stop their careers for 6 months to take care of their families. So these legislative mechanisms or these corporate mechanisms must help mothers and fathers have the same career when they take time to take care of their children.
Third category, important, Louise, is what you call this cognitive, strange cognitive bias, which leads society to consider that women, in their economic contribution, their intellectual participation to panels, as being slightly sub-men. You don't see that today, but trust me, there are a certain number of studies, quite relevant, which have been carried out, which indicate that men and women, by the way, there is this discriminating cognitive bias vis-à-vis against women. And we have to consider that a man or a woman, whenever he or she has demonstrated merits and commitment, can contribute exactly at the same level, and sometimes even better, but not always. Louise, we'd like to have your opinion now. Rwanda, my country, is a country which has decided to give the women the right they duly deserve, including starting with our parliament, which is 63% feminine. But this political choice has been reinforced by the contribution of women in the reconstruction of the country following the genocide, in the involvement of women, political women, for example. 63% of female members of parliament voted very important laws. They did lobbying, they did advocacy, they went around the country and they collected they collected the needs and expectations of women. They took them to the parliament. They passed law, and among the first laws which were accepted and uploaded by the country in 2005-6, there was access to heritage for women. You know, with this time it was cultural, but that is, usually it was the boy of the family who would inherit everything and sometimes would share part of the family wealth with sisters or women in the family. This had an immediate impact because in a country where there's been the genocide, the war, there were a lot of problems of heritage. Court cases that were endless with family bickering and fights, and this gave better status to women, the fact that they could inherit, even though it was just a little plot of land, in society. This has changed the status of women. These women, well, in parliament, also are certain that they would pass very stringent laws concerning discrimination, against discrimination, or crimes against women and girls, including rape. And with time, society, men, women, have realized that women in Rwanda plays a major role in society. I had the great pleasure to attend a legislative election in 2008, where men would be aligned behind a woman to vote for her by saying she is educated children of the wide family, because it does happen, of the wider family. She's been able to contribute, economically speaking, to the household. Men explained why they would vote for these women. But, of course, Rwanda is well advanced, but we still have problems. We still have problems of access to finance by women. It is also linked to education. It is linked to the lack of education, especially when it comes to financial, economic, education in science, a major aspect as well. And therefore, I'd say that what we do observe in some countries, that what goes well in France, for example, can we share it? Can we make such practice available to other countries as source of inspiration and adaptation? It is important. And another thing is that some women did great things, and they're everywhere in the world today. And often I'm thinking about women from Kenya, whom I knew well, who was the queen of environment and preservation in Kenya. She got Ngai Babai, Nobel Prize winner. She went around the country by mobilizing the various communities in Kenya so that those communities could claim their needs for environmental protection. That woman in Kenya, she's more than a role model. She changed the lives of Kenyans. She's a resilient woman, strong. Unfortunately, she died. But it's not just her. There are other women who are Economy Nobel Prize. There are women who created universities, women who, I think all those stories, great stories of women, should also be available and shared. One thing that took place in my country was to change stereotypes. For example, concerning the positioning of women in positions usually reserved to men. Police officer, police commissioner, chief inspector, woman who was director of a major bank, a commercial bank, trading bank, sorry, Minister of Foreign Affairs. I was Minister of Foreign Affairs. What's important there is that the little boy and the little girl will grow seeing women and men without positioning women in a manner that minimizes them or like was mentioned by the Secretary of State. And it means managing society without making too much noise, when little boys see a woman head of, police, chief inspector or mayor of a large city, well, they grow up with this experience. And in their own lives, in their own professional lives, even in their household, there will be another view on what is the woman and what the woman is able to do. Laurence. Difficult after the two previous speakers to add something. Well, first let's start with do sessions where we can share our experience, our understandings, and our policies. I think it's right to say, and Emmanuel, you said it initially, there is a lot of regulation, law, legislation, which move the cause of women, quotas, will improve the cause of women. We were all reluctant initially, but it does work. You all said things which, in my opinion, when we see in France, we will advance on quotas. In Europe, too, we got regulations, legislation will facilitate parental vacations or leave. We got feminist for 80 years. It does work, but something remains that most important is the perception of women and the perception of society. Do you remember when Larry Summers explained that we women, Larry Summers, who Economy Nobel Prize winner, we didn't have a brain for mathematics? When we look at the surveys and studies, women, as you were saying, Emmanuel, succeed just as well as men when we do mathematics, French, science. And Marianne Bertrand, who's another economist, amazing because we are in the circle of the economy, shows that girls who are in business schools, non-mixed business schools, don't ask themselves the question. They do more math, more science. So I'm not saying that we should stop mixed schools, but they escape stereotypes and they can really go full blast. Another thing, we talk about politics because Christine was saying participation of women increases the GDP, employment, and creation of wealth, and what we can share. In the US, studies were carried out. We look at the way the participation of women changes politics. What we found that women raise more money for their political campaign than men. That's the first thing. Second thing is that they pass more laws than men. Not do they pass more laws, but since usually they were cooperative, and you talked about that, they co-signed more laws than men. But in addition, they have the laws voted more than men. So we should all accept that we are at least as efficient, if not more, in politics than men. And this was said by an American journalist called Tony Donkopi. So what I want to say here is to follow up on what Christine said. Women should make their own choice. There is no guilt to experience if you love working. There is no guilt to experience if you spend your time with your children differently from other women. There is no good jobs for women or bad jobs for women. Oh, you have to be a teacher. You could have the same holidays than your kids. No. And not only there is no sort of a women assigned business or stereotypes, but and I think there is nothing better for children than to have parents who are happy in what they do, and when they have time with their children, they really spend their time rather than thinking always, I sacrificed myself for you. So for me, what remains to be done is that all of us here, when you talk to your children, when you meet students, when you talk to your nephews, the friends of your friends, you tell girls that they can and they can choose. They should not, but they can choose. I'd like to come back to why collectively should we integrate women? Well, that was the something that Christine Lagarde mentioned. Well, and in fact, in my domain in economy, we can study ourselves. What we see, what we see is that in fact women and men do not pay attention to the same things, and this is true in their studies. Most of the doctors today are women. So women naturally go to healthcare. They go more easily to literary discipline. This is where salaries are lower. This explains part of the fact that they have, on average, they earn less money. And there is this way to understand problem in life, to address problems in life, which is different. Well, anyway, in economy, we don't study the same thing. We got a Nobel Prize winner, Esther Duflo, who did development economy. She didn't do macroeconomics. Very few women do that, actually, not enough. And this, of course, has an impact on the type of results we will obtain, because less represented in the authorities. And in the US, for example, when they are interviewed, researchers, they have a vision of the world which is different from that of men. They don't think that markets are very efficient. Of course, they think that there is discrimination. They experience it, The US is a highly discriminating country against women, so they feel the discrimination and they see the inefficacy in the markets. It has an impact on economic policies, because if you think markets work alone, well, you don't implement the same public policies as if you think that they don't work alone. So these are true consequences for everybody. So the fact that the understanding of problems and what's important to study or not, well, it's not the same thing when you're a man or a woman. Second thing is that if you look, and this has been mentioned, violence. Well, 5% of inmates are women in France. 95% are men. They're more violent than women, statistically speaking, and it has plays a role in politics. It's important to have women who will negotiate at the highest level of the state. They're more cooperative as well, to have a more peaceful world. Balance between the genders, would be good for the rest of mankind, and not just for question of justice, but also for issue of economic efficacy. If you'd like to come back to this question of what can women bring to the world economy, because it's a conference on the world economy, I'd be quite happy to hear your vision. So there are 10 million jobs, 10% PIBs. Okay, what I'm interested is to do a call. I'm calling on the people here. The participation of women in the economic studies is very gendered driven. And it would be most important that young women should go towards disciplines which are often considered as male-driven macroeconomics. We write in it, you know, monetary specialization, financial specialization. Usually they are full of men and very few women. So to such an extent that you said it early on, well, figures vary between 55 and 60% of women have a higher education diploma, and therefore the difference with the differences are men. And the women researchers are 30% of the world population of researchers. So there is a first loss in this domain. When it comes to women researchers, it's down to 25%. So clearly, young girls should get involved in economy so that afterwards they can join financial domains. For example, a dream to be able to hire more young economist women. Boys do not always agree when I say that, but never mind. We created special grants to enable young girls who study economy to go to the end of their economic dream, and especially when it comes to macroeconomics.
We shouldn't let them lose these topics. We have to give ourselves the means and the chances to get there. So several institutions, including the European Central Bank, have set up quotas. We have doubled the number of women in higher functions of ECB. And in 2026, we will reach our target, and we're working to get up to raise in the pipe, so to say, competent women who are qualified and who will be the managers of tomorrow and that can replace us. And it's absolutely essential to invest in their future and to trust them, to give them the courage of shining through because they have the right talent. I've been working in these highly masculine environments for 40 years and defending the cause of women. I haven't seen a young woman wherever I worked, whether it be in the private sector, Ministry of Finance, IMF or ECB, coming to ask me a greater bonus or a greater increase in salary because they felt they deserved it. I've had tons of men asking me that, but no women. Louise, I'd like to mention African women in small stores and SMEs. It's a world that gets countries living in Africa. Women who get up early in the morning, leave their village with their large basket full of tomatoes, potatoes, and who go to the market. I believe that we should take all this into account. In the International Francophone organization, we have a small project we give out small amounts and larger amounts. We started a fund of 3 million euros during the pandemic. It's not much if you take into account what has to be done. And since 2020, I've been visiting the beneficiaries of this fund in the various countries, Togo, Lebanon. I went to Cape Verde a few weeks ago. And these women, they do absolutely great things with very little money. The equivalent of restaurant ticket in Paris has 2 or 3 families living with it. So recognizing the role of these women who do these small actions, sometimes very informally, is a great contribution for their countries. I don't know if Christine has lived through this, has seen this experience when she went to the various countries. But these women do not receive the applause, the appraisal that they should have, and the regard that she should have. And they're present everywhere in the world. So I just wanted to attract your attention to these women because they're extremely brave. And sometimes these women have a minimum level of education, sometimes absolutely no education. I personally think that women are born intelligent, but never mind. It's true when you see women, what is called village women in our southern countries, when you look at them handling a smartphone, it's incredible. They haven't even been to school for 2-3 years. They can manage the studies of their children. They know how to be on time to place their orders. They don't know math, but these women in their daily life contribute a lot, not only to the economy of their country, but also to the development of their families. And I believe that the time has come to recognize the women who work from home and who are considered as women without a job, when in fact they work from morning to evening, and they contribute a lot to the well-being, including the economic well-being of their families. Christine, you wanted to say something? No, I wanted to add to what Louise said. This economic activity is not accounted anywhere, so we will talk about it forever, but we haven't accounted it. Laurence? I just wanted to come back to what you said about the progress that we have registered, to say that we shouldn't forget that an economic or religious crisis is sufficient for the progress in the rights of women to be challenged. We've seen it with Afghanistan, we've seen it with Iran. In 1950, women used to go dancing in Iran, they were like us. We've seen that with Ukrainian women. A lot of them have taken refuge in Poland, and we know that the right to abortion in Poland is not respected, not complied with, and it's all the more important since we always thought that the rights of women would be challenged in the least developed countries, and it's not the case. I would like to launch an appeal. The European deputies have launched something that is called the European Compact for Simone Veil, so that for all countries of the EU, the legislations concerning women were put at the highest level of that they had in any country in Europe. So talk to your deputies about that. Thank you, Laurence. This is a great idea because it's not only in Iran, in Egypt as well. There was a lot of movement backwards, and in fact the worst situation in terms of gender equality is Middle East and North Africa. Sub-Saharan Africa are more heterogeneous. Obviously in Sudan it's terrible, but in other countries it's not, like Rwanda it's not. I don't want to say it's cultural. It may be correlated to poverty, but in very poor countries the right of women is respected. And you have to understand that when you challenge the right of women, you challenge a lot of communities, in fact, and I believe that the rights of women should be set in stone in order to have a fairer and more efficient society. I'd like to come back to the idea that women, especially, for example, in the US, perform better than men. This is a sign of discrimination. I dream of a day where we won't have these three exceptional women talking to us, but three very average women who will be as mediocre as the men we often hear, because that will be a sign that it's over with discrimination. Europe is like a lighthouse in the dark in terms of the right of women, but nevertheless, there are still issues. So if I try to summarize where we stand in terms of solutions, we mentioned the quotas, and this works, and because you can have the idea that if you put a woman in a given function, it's a disaster. But when you put the woman in that position, it's not a disaster. Laws are voted. You have role models, as Louise was saying, put women in places where they weren't expected. Obviously, when they get there, they're usually exceptional women, because when you're in a discriminatory world, you have to be exceptional to persevere. I noted the issue of schools separating boys and girls. It might be a solution, even though it will be difficult, because for scientific topics, it seems that women had given up studying mathematics, and this is indispensable for many professions that are not very feminine. And something else was mentioned, accounting for the non-merchant GDP, and I believe this is very important, because when you look at the production, non-merchant production, if you have to invest in something, you should maybe invest in a well and not in a road, because this is where the women spend more time. But if you don't account for it, then your investment decisions will be different. So much for the elements I have noted. Maybe we can have a look last time at whether I forgot something. Christine Lagarde, do you want to add anything to this modest list of solutions? I would be happy to hear you. Well, I believe that we're really trying to open doors that are already opened. The problem is that sometimes they are closed afterwards, and that some women are blocked in their progressions, cannot go any further. So I believe that each one of us, where we stand, should try and identify solutions for support and encouragement. There's a very nice book written by a journalist from BBC, it was Claire Shipman, who's a researcher from Harvard on these issues. It's called The Code of Confidence. And it shows in a highly empirical way and a very obvious way that the capital of confidence you have up till the age of 8, for example, is reduced by 30% between the age of 8 and 13. Your little girls of 9 years old, for example, between the age of 8 and 13, if they wanted to be an astronaut, a firefighter, this confidence that they have disappears. So as parents and grandparents, we must be very careful and must protect the confidence capital of young girls to help them attain their dreams, because as you said earlier, Louise, women are intelligent, they have dreams, they have some confidence. We have to help them, as Claude Biden-Ginsburg said, let them breathe, let us breathe. Well, talking about this confidence issue, don't you think that economics is a real solution? Well, I'm not an expert in education. There may be moments in the life of young men and women where it's better to work separately and to develop your competencies and work in a trusted manner, and then aim towards mixity, which is the principle of our life. If I may, I would like to conclude by mentioning something that I've come across quite a lot with young girls, teenagers, or even older girls. Even when I was 20 years old, for example, I'd like to mention the lack of ambition. The fact that you hesitate, you're not certain you want to go there. And this is a real barrier for all girls and throughout the world, whatever the culture. When I went to study in the US, I was 19 or 20. It was a totally new environment for me. I came from a small country, lost in the heart of the continent. I got to the University of Delaware, Joe Biden's university, in fact. And there were 25,000 students. I'd never seen anything like that. I was thinking, how am I going to make it? I got here, that was difficult, but now that I am here, am I going to succeed? And I wanted to prove to my parents that I could succeed very quickly because they had spent a lot of money on me, and it was difficult for them to spend this money. I was a small African girl. I came from a very green, sunny country. I got there with a terrible winter. I'd never seen the winter except in the books. And I thought, well, how am I going to get up in the morning? I tried to get up. It was dark. I felt, well, I want to get back to bed. I'll go to class next week. I can't go there today. And I have many examples like this where you think, well, will I make it? Will I succeed? And this is a message for young girls. Go there. Go ahead. Laurence? Not easy after that. Usually this kind of discussion ends up by saying, thank you very much. I owe a lot to my husband who supported me throughout my career while raising the kids. And girls say, don't say that. I would like to say thank you to the role models. Thank you, Christine. Thank you, Louise. Thank you, Emmanuel. Thank you, Claire. I would like to thank all the women who are sitting here, who got us dreaming because they were ahead of us or encouraged us thanks to us, and to the youngsters pushing us. Thank you, girls. Well, this will be the final word. As we say, behind each powerful woman, there is a great man. So let's get going and celebrate.